Okay, so this is basically a follow-up on some of the stuff I talked about in the last video, some of the things not to use, why not to use them, and what to use. And I'm going to cover a little bit more than just that. If we start over here at the end, this is a waterborne grease and wax remover. I prefer to use that when I do have to use a grease and wax remover. The reason is it'll take off a waterborne impurity as well as it will a solvent-borne impurity. In the old days when we used to do custom work, we'd wipe the whole car down with distilled water, dry it off, and then we'd come back and wipe it down with a solvent-based grease and wax remover just for that reason, to be able to get both kinds of impurities off the car. This is something new. It's from the waterborne world, and I'm not a big fan of waterborne paint. I've certainly used it quite a bit. Just not a fan of it. I think the minuses way outweigh the positives on it. And as long as solvent-borne is still compliant, why not use solvent-borne? Oh, and this right over here, this is Guide Coat. I'm a big fan of Guide Coat in liquid form, not the dry coat, the dry Guide Coat stuff. It became such a liability at the paint spot selling those materials that I just discontinued it at both of my locations. We don't have it, you can't buy it from us, we won't ever sell it again. So what I opt for is black lacquer. The best way to do it is to get some black lacquer, mix it with lacquer binder, and like 1-to-1 mix with lacquer thinner, and use it like this and put it in your gun. That's the most economical way. I think we sell it in pints and quarts. You could probably make 3 to 5 gallons out of that, and it's cheap as hell. So that's the easiest way to do it, especially if you're doing a complete. If you do have to have an aerosol version, this is something we actually made at the paint spot. We make aerosols up there, and the only person that really makes out on aerosols is me, the paint spot. This is a sucker's bet. There's only 4 ounces of product in there, so if you have to have it, good. I make lots of money off it and I'll sell it to you. Okay, this over here is a product that I was not very kind about in the last segment. This is epoxy primer. However, this doesn't come from the automotive side. We have several paint lines up at the paint spot, so we cover the industrial market, the fleet market, and the automotive market, custom, collision, and all the above. So if you were to buy an epoxy primer from the automotive side, whether it's RM, and RM that's our top line, that's great stuff. It's not good, it's great, right? It doesn't have the chromate in it anymore, it doesn't have the lead, all that stuff. This is old school stuff, so if you're hell-bent on using epoxy, you're pretty much relegated to using this. And everything does have its place. I use it. I don't put it directly on metal for a foundation because it's a horrible foundation. We talked about something else, and I'll get to that in a minute. But there it is. The reason we use this particular one, the red oxide, is, and I'll show you a 61 Impala that's right behind Paul right now. We'll get to that in a few minutes. Is to replicate a factory finish. The person that's going to buy that Impala is going to have to spend a lot of money to get it from me, and it'll be well worth it. But they'll be looking for stuff like that. So it does have its place. This was a phenomenal product here. The predecessor to the MP200, which was a direct-to-metal primer, and the MP210, which was a direct-to-metal sealer, was MP1000. MP1000, and we were involved in the original demos. As a matter of fact, my daughter is on one of the original YouTube videos. It's kind of a commercial for Matrix back in the day, and it was MP1000. It just became a mathematical nightmare to convert it from a primer to a sealer. There was a MC1000, which was a converter, and the mathematics behind it was confusing a lot of people. I guess a lot of people in the body and paint end of things aren't mathematicians, so it was just kind of complicated. So they redesignated the numbering system, split it up into 2 separate products. They're both 4-to-1. The MA200 was the activator for both of these products, and it was phenomenal. The problem with Matrix is, when Kent Gardner started that company, he was a great man. He was somebody that I really looked up to, and I'd never met the man personally, but I just loved the guy for his tenacity and his willing to go up against the system and win and not ever quit. And it went from that, he died eventually, and it seemed like that was the end of Matrix. They got acquired and got acquired again, and later got acquired again. The last person that acquired them was Sherwin-Williams, and I am not a Sherwin-Williams fan. Sorry, Matrix guys, I know you don't want to hear that, but I'm not going to sell anything with the Sherwin-Williams name on it. Just not into it. The paint spot doesn't endorse it. Rick Ciotti won't sell it. So that kind of went away. Valspar tried to take it over because that was the first acquisition, and then Sherwin-Williams bought Valspar. They didn't do such a good job with it. So we had to start looking for something else. That's when we came up with the Clawson products. And interestingly enough, the Clawson products isn't anything new. It's the oldest product of its kind out on the market, and it's totally separate from all the rest of them. This is the real deal. Waterproof, you know, the whole 9 yards. You can paint over this stuff. Everything about it is great. This is a picture of what I was talking about, the rust defender. This is what I put on the foundation of all these cars. Now, I know I talked a little bit about the grease and wax remover. Interesting thing, if you use Ivory liquid dish soap, got to be Ivory, it's probably the cheapest one in the supermarket, that detergent eliminates the need for any kind of grease and wax remover. And in this business, less is best. And you can apply that to just about everything you do in the body and paint industry. So you clean it with Ivory liquid dish soap, and it's a done deal. It's ready to go. You don't need to use this or anything else, as long as you don't touch it with greasy hands or anything. So that's a picture of that. Z-Glass is one of the products that I talked about. If you have a corner or an edge that needs body work, you use regular body filler. It's very fragile, and that's the first area that's going to chip or piss you off, right? This stuff is bulletproof. This stuff can be drilled and tapped after a 12-hour cure. It can be painted over. It's waterproof. It's got etch in it, the whole 9 yards. This is a great, great, great product. This is a picture of the Lighten Up. That's one of their body fillers, and you can tell it's got self-etch in it right there. I didn't have any of the Z-Chrome down here. This is a can. What I usually do to get people to try this stuff is I'll take gallons and I'll take an empty quart can, pour it off, and so I just put a generic label on it. Here, try this stuff, tell me what you think about it. They come back, they have to buy a gallon, right? So this is the only thing I got with the Z-Chrome label on it. This product on top is really cool. Back in the old days when we did body work, nobody had this thing called glazing putties, and here's one, just some random generic thing. Everybody thinks they have to use this stuff. We never did in the old days, and this particular version is pretty cool because you don't lose any. It's got like an IV bag, so if you're going to use it, I guess you want to use that at one of these so you don't waste the product. The problem with that stuff is it's just one more thing that you have to buy and you have to, you know, use. The problem with that stuff is when you go to sand that stuff out, you're usually affecting the area that's in good shape around your bodywork. So I don't like to use it too much. I'd just as soon do it all with fillers. So most of the time if I'm using one of these fillers right here, I'll just go back over it with the filler. If you do have little pinholes or something that you need to get out, this stuff right here actually reduces its resin, and it's the same resin that builds their products, right? So you can add a couple of capfuls of this stuff to your body filler, make a glazing putty out of it, and you can make it to any consistency you want for the application. Great stuff. Like what I was saying, in the old days, we all knew that you needed something like that once in a while just to cover up a pinhole or something. Well, we always had a gallon of cheap fiberglass resin next to our body filler, and we'd take capfuls of that stuff and we mixed it in with the Bondo or whatever brand filler we were using, and we just made it on the fly. Well, people got opportunistic, mostly these companies that manufacture that shit, and they just said from now on you got to use it. And they teach that stuff in all the schools, and I really disagree with stuff like that. You don't. The Nitrostan was commonly used. Nitrostan can still be used in this day and age, although I would say it should be used for pinholes and light scratches only, always to be used on top of a 2K primer, sanded out, and then top coated with a 2K primer. That way its reversibility doesn't come into play. It's sandwiched in there. A tube of Nitrostan should probably last you, if you're using it correctly, probably 5 or 6 years. That's how sparingly you'd ever want to use it. So I talked a little bit about the 777 series earlier when we were explaining what we did to the Impala. This is what I used, the 777 satin black H87 hardener. It's all North Star products, comes from our fleet line. Good stuff. And because it's the 777 binder, it's a direct to metal anti-sag type thing. This is a product that probably a lot of you guys have heard of, and if you notice the can's upside down, that's because you never take the lid off this. If you do take the lid off of this and use a little bit of it, it's probably going to be no good when you go back. This is still very much liquid, and this can's probably 3 years old. So what I do is I turn it upside down, pop a hole in it with an ice pick, and then after I use it, put some Por 15 around a lag bolt, just a regular screw, put it back in there, and it stays liquid. This product can never be stirred, never shaken. You just roll it across a flat surface. It's made based on nanotechnology, so little air pockets or air bubbles that get into it will stay into it if you do it any other way. So you don't want to do that. It's a great product, used properly. I would use it maybe on a frame or inside of a door jamb or inside of quarter panels or something. There's zero UV protection, and it actually needs some of the rust to be on there present at the time that you use it, because that's part of the formula that makes this stuff work. As a matter of fact, POR, that's an acronym for paint over rust. So can be used. It's kind of a half-assed way of doing it, you know, to some of you guys. I would never use it on the exterior of a car, but it can be used in a pinch, and I do use it once in a while. This product underneath here is my version of a product that you guys may have heard of out there, lizard skin. They kind of pissed me off a few years ago, so I figured out how they made their product and I made it. And where they have a sound deadener and a ceramic insulator, I've just got one component. And there's probably about 8 products at the paint spot that you can't buy anywhere but the paint spot. And I keep that on the down low because somebody would just reverse engineer it, kind of like what I did with their stuff. It's made out of latex paint microspheres basically, and I just changed the ratio to make up one component versus 2 separate components. And I left the water out of the mix. I figure if anybody wants to reduce it down, most people have access to tap water. So in a second, we're going to show you the 61 Impala where some of these products actually came into play, okay? Okay, so now we're looking at the 61 Impala bubble top. That's what this is. This car was badly rusted out, and most people would not have bothered fixing it. They would have tried to find something better to start with. But I got a good deal on it, and I wanted to do it, so I did it. Ended up, we had to make a lot of the panels, not really much available as far as sheet metal and whatnot for these cars. So this one got put back together using a 4-door for parts. These quarter panels were sectioned in from the 4-door from about here back on the lower half. This was handmade. The bottom of this was handmade. I think the rocker panels are off of 62. Floors got sectioned in, and the whole back filler was 63, 64. Some of the trunk was 64, 62 modified. So what we've done is we did whatever we had to do to put it back together and make it look right. You can see inside here some of the red oxide epoxy primer. The reason we did that is because that's original to the car. So the guy that wants to buy a high-end restoration, and this is a 4-speed 425 horse 409, so this car's a pretty valuable car. We wanted to make it look original. Coupled with the fact that we were going to coat it with the Microtex afterwards, and since that's a waterborne product, you can't put it directly on metal, so you have to have something down to put it there, otherwise that waterborne product will start the rust process. And I was adamant, since this car was so badly rusted, I wanted to make sure that this thing never, ever, ever, I mean 100 years goes by, this will never do what it did before I got it. So we used the red oxide epoxy primer. We came back and we put the lizard skin copy, you know, on the floor here. And I even did the outside, the underneath of the car, a little bit heavier on that. That'll keep the heat out, that'll keep a lot of the noise and stuff out of it. You can see the gloss black on here. Don't know if I'm going to leave the car black or not, but typically when I do an old car, I always put a couple of coats of single stage black on it for a couple of reasons. Number one, black shows up all the imperfections, so I can see exactly how my bodywork turned out and any flaws. I'm going to, you know, basically go back over it and block it again anyway, so I can touch up any of that stuff. That, and then the single stage is such a high build product, and North Star is what I use. So not all single stage is created equal. If you buy Nason or some cheap single stage, you bought cheap stuff, you shouldn't expect good results. North Star's bulletproof. So that's why I use the product. I always want to let it set 4 or 5 weeks. I did this in the winter time, so that probably has been about 3 months now. I got busy on the 58, and it's plenty cured up now. You want to make sure it's completely cross-linked. And you can tell when it's cross-linked when you can take your thumbnail and put into an inconspicuous area and you don't see an impression. So if you're going to cut and buff a car, you don't ever cut and buff the car until you've done that thumbnail test. If you're going to reblock it and you wanted the paint to do all the cross-linking and shrink or whatever it's going to do in the process, thumbnail test. You got to remember that. So we've got the gloss black out here, a couple of coats, a little bit of the North Star goes a hell of a long way, so I probably used a couple of quarts doing this car. And then on the front here, the firewall, it all had the epoxy primer underneath it, and I went back to back with the satin black. So satin black, gloss black, the epoxy, and this sound deadener on here, all within the same day. I didn't really wait on this stuff. Now, this whole car started with the rust offender. And I can tell you that because of all the sectioning that went on down the quarter panels in the back of the car, and even in some of the sail panels right here, it was bad. There was a lot of ups and downs on it. So I personally put that Clawson's product, the rust offender, over 1/4 inch thick on these quarter panels. I had that much blocking to do, and I didn't prime and block it 15 times. So when I came back with that stuff a day after I applied it, the first thing I blocked it out with was 80 grit. Went back over it with a little more because in that I actually went through some of it, and then I blocked it out from that point forward with 150. Incidentally, I painted the black after sanding it with 150, and I know that's probably freaking a lot of painters out, but this is a sacrificial paint job anyway. So is there sanding scratches through this black? Yeah, but it's only on here to prove where my bodywork is and to block out. So why would I spend all the time finishing it out when I know I have to come back and do some more later? What we'll do on this is we'll block it out with 500 probably, or 600, and then we'll put the real paint job on it. Whether it's going to be black, a combination, or a completely different color, we'll probably do the rest of it in base coat, clear coat. For that, I always top coat it with Matrix MS42. That's still a viable product and still a good product. In my estimation, I think that's the best clear on the market. Okay, what we're looking at here is the chassis for the 61 Impala, and I don't want to confuse this with the 58, but since I use that as an example for some of the products we actually used on the 58, some of the things that I talked about on our first video, I might as well elaborate a little bit on that. It's work in progress. I'm kind of working on both those cars at the same time. I did start the 61 way before I ever even got the 58, and that's typically the way I roll. I'll work on 4 or 5 of these damn cars. But here's the chassis. What we got here is a dummy 348 that I had laying around. It's a good engine, but I needed to fit it all up and make sure everything was cool, because this one's getting the 425 horsepower 409 with the dual quads and a Muncie 4-speed and all that stuff. So I wanted to update some of the stuff on it. I'm actually waiting for some control arms to come in, and what you see here is the dusty old chassis and everything. This has been sandblasted and painted with the 777 series North Star single stage satin black 2 years ago. I'm going to wait for those control arms to get here. We're going to change those things out. Everything that I needed to mount this motor in here for has been done, so I'm going to be pulling that out. The 409's upstairs. It's basically put together. I decided to take it back apart, put a roller cam in it instead of a flat tappet, just because some of the games that the oil companies are playing, or the EPA with zinc and phosphorus, just didn't want to take a chance on that. Not that I'm not still using hydraulic and solid lift cams. I am, but just not for that application. Got too much money into that 409. So you can see what I've done here is I've converted the front over to disc brakes. I don't know how well you can see that, just so this old car will stop. The reason I'm changing the control arm is to put a little bit more caster in it, make the car handle a little bit better than they used to. They were boats. They kind of floated all over the road. And then back here in the back, I'm not one to put a Ford rear end in a Chevrolet product. I think that's a cardinal sin. So I built the rear end that was in the car, and these rear ends are bulletproof, and they're designed a lot like a Ford 9-inch, so I don't understand why people use Ford rear ends in a GM product. I just don't get that. Anyways, that's the original rear end. I put a posi carrier in it, I put 373 gears in it, I put Mosier axles in it. It's bulletproof. What wasn't bulletproof is the panhard bar and the 3-link suspension that it had on it. Just wasn't right. What I did was I used the original lower link arms and I boxed those in, and I put adjustable link arms on the top, and I reinforced them with these bars in the front here just to reinforce that whole section there. And I used, originally what I was going to do is, I've got the 4-door parts car that I alluded to earlier for that car. So I took the upper control arm or link arm off of that car, and I took the bracket off of it, and I was just going to add this to the other side. They only originally had one over here on the passenger side. And I found out that that wouldn't work because I wanted to change the ride height on this car, and there's no adjustment there, so my pinion angle was going to be all screwed up. So I had to go to some of these adjustable link arms, and that's why you see the red ones in here. They're adjustable. The panhard bar is adjustable. I can put this ride height anywhere I want, and I can adjust it to where everything is symmetrical with the rear end. Right now it's bottomed out, but if I wanted to drive the car that way, I pretty much could. So that's a little bit of an explanation on what you see here with the 61 chassis. And we'll be doing more on this car as time goes by. I'm just waiting to get the 409 put together so I can change it out, clean up the chassis, and then basically put the body, as you just saw it, back on this thing, and then build it while it's on the frame. That's when I'll block sand it and put the final paint job on it, and I'll make sure that you guys see that.